Special thanks to Tokyo Treat and Sakurako for sponsoring today's video. Look, we all know that Yamamoto is a badass. We know that when he steps foot onto the battlefield, the balance of power is immediately upended. And we also know that the two biggest villains of the series, Aizen and Yamamoto, had to devise special measures with which to deal with the original head captain specifically. Yamamoto is the strongest Shinigami who ever lived, and as I've said numerous times before, he's clearly written to demonstrate the absolute peak of what a pure Shinigami can achieve. He's a master of all four combat arts, has perhaps the most powerful Zanpakuto in Bleach, and has a millennium of experience under his belt, ranging from his days as a ruthless warlord to founding and shaping the Gotei 13 itself. During the first Quincy invasion, when the Gotei 13 is caught unaware by a massive surprise Quincy assault, the Soul Society faces its most desperate hour, with even captains and vice-captains being quickly overwhelmed and defeated by the Vandenreich's ultimate fighting force, the Sternritter. However, as Yamamoto enters the battle himself, he instantly wipes out a member of the Sternritter before telling a stunned Hisagi that he will strike down every last one of the invaders with his own hands. And so today, I'm here to examine the veracity of the head captain's threat. If he wanted to, if the situation allowed for it, could Yamamoto have killed every single member of the Sternritter by himself? It's a big question, and considering Yamamoto, despite his assertion to Hisagi, actually ends up just heading straight for Yamamoto instead, well, we'll never truly know. But we're going to dive in nonetheless, and see just how well the head captain could have fared against the Sternritter based on what we know of the character, what we know of their characters, and what we see in the manga with the surrounding context. Before we get started on today's video, guys, which is probably going to be a long one, consider hitting subscribe down below to help support the channel. It does make a massive difference on our journey to 300,000 subs. And I just got to say, before we do start, a huge thank you to each and every one of you for the amazing support the channel has received over the last couple of weeks or so. It does mean everything. It is wonderful to see, and again, I do appreciate it so very much. Again, speaking of which, consider checking out my Patreon as well if you want to take the support for the channel that extra step further. There will be some spoilers probably for the 1,000-Year Blood War arc in this video to come as well, though not many I wouldn't have thought, but since the anime hasn't finished yet, I figured I'd include this disclaimer all the same. And of course, speaking of supporting the channel, before we dive into today's video properly, first a word from today's sponsor. Well, I can scarcely believe it, but the sun has finally emerged after a lengthy hiatus here in the UK, and the days are getting longer, which means it must be time for Tokyo Treat and Sakurako's new spring boxes. Tokyo Treat is an exclusive monthly snack box packed full with a carefully curated selection to help you experience Japanese culture from the comfort of your own home. This month the theme is Sakura Spring Snack Fest, and it puts the focus on Japan's iconic cherry blossoms with limited edition snacks like Sakura Kit Kats, cherry blossom cookies, cherry mochi bites, and more, all of which are perfect for sharing with family and friends. Look at these Kit Kats. I mean, that is pretty stunning for a bag of Kit Kats. As far as Kit Kats go, they look pretty incredible. There is a kind of immediate floral, botanical smell as soon as you crack this bag open. So it looks like you're supposed to write a note on the front of these Kit Kats and then give them to someone as a small gift or something like that. Maybe that's a White Day thing, I can never quite remember. But I do like the fact that the note they've gone for here on the front of the bag just straight up says fight. Also, just taking a quick look at the cultural guide booklet that you get with each box, and looking at this page here that talks about Sakura in anime, and aren't we missing someone? Where's Byakuya? Come on. And then next I want to take a look at this Sakura Blossom Cake. The text on the front is inexplicably in French, but I mean, that probably means it tastes pretty good, right? That's how things work when it comes to patisserie, I think. I love the little Sakura Blossom center with this cake. Let's dive in. So again, according to the booklet, the center of this cake is actually chocolate, and once you get to it, you can tell. It's pretty cool, actually. It does taste very nice. Meanwhile, Sakurako's theme this month is called Sakura in Bloom, and they invite you to enjoy Hanami, Japan's cherry blossom viewing tradition. To celebrate, the box is filled with delicately crafted seasonal sweets like Sakura Castella, Sakura Mochi, and more, all of which pair perfectly with the included Sakura Blossom tea. Additionally, the month's tableware item is this Sakura Kozara plate. Can you count up how many times I just said Sakura? Wow, the Sakura Kozara plate is actually really lovely, it's very tasteful, and that may very well be one of my favourite tableware items we've ever received. Because I'm a sucker for sweets, we're going to dive right into the Sakura mochi. Now, mochi is something that you are increasingly able to get here in the UK, but again, it wasn't really something I'd had prior to working with Tokyo Treat and Sakurako. The texture is so cool and so interesting and weird, but it is really delicious all the same as well. And then finally, we're going to dive into these rather beautiful Sakura Kohakuto, or sugar candies. Again, because I can't say no to sweets. What I like about these is how they are crunchy on the outside. Immediately, they kind of shatter like glass, and then they are really kind of soft and very sweet and nice on the inside. And look, this is essentially Senbon Sakura in edible form. In fact, the booklet even says they have a crystallized exterior, which is pretty cool. And in fact, speaking of the booklet, each box also comes with a cultural booklet that features snack descriptions, allergen information, and of course some insights into the cultural theming of the month's boxes. Alright, but that's it for March's boxes. A big thank you to Tokyo Treat and Sakurako for supporting the channel as always. If you'd like to pick up these boxes to help ring in Japan's legendary cherry blossoms and celebrate the start of spring in style, then visit the link in either the description or the pinned comment below and use my code TOMO for an exclusive offer of $5 off of your first order. Not only do you save money, but you directly support the channel as well. Thanks everyone, and enjoy. So, while Yamamoto doesn't get too much time to shine in the Thousand Year Blood War arc, we do still glean a great and pretty straightforward understanding of how the average Sternritter fared against the Captain Commander. To put it bluntly, they didn't stand a chance. Yamamoto first arrives on the battlefield as Sternritter O, the overkill Driscoll Bursey, is savagely beating up Shuhei Hisagi, accepted as one of the strongest vice-captains in the Gotei 13. Hisagi himself notes that the gulf between the two of them is incomprehensible, and from the looks of things, the vice-captain is about to be killed. It's crucial to remember that while the gap in strength between the weakest and the strongest Sternritter is, frankly, astronomical, they are all, as a baseline, captain level, and while captain level has itself become an absurdly nebulous term with little to no real meaning anymore, at the very least, we can attribute it to mean that even the weakest Sternritter, the so-called weakest Sternritter, should be able to defeat the so-called strongest vice-captain, who doesn't have a bankai, with no real issue, and that's kind of what we're seeing here. Now, personally, I don't think Driscoll is really all that impressive, especially after Kubo revealed a devastating weakness to his shrift in Club Outside. Whereas Hisagi is, as I mentioned, consistently portrayed as one of the most skilled and competent vice-captains of the series, and at this point in the story he doesn't yet have a bankai. Having a bankai being perhaps the most overt and simplistic requirement for a character to be considered captain level outside of very special circumstances like Kenpachi, for example. And yet, as mentioned, Hisagi doesn't even seem to do anything. He doesn't seem to be able to fight back at all against Driscoll here. And we see a couple of other examples of this immense disparity throughout the arc as well. Kangdu manages to defeat Rangiku and seemingly kill her without taking a single scratch of damage, while Liege Baro snipes multiple vice-captain level fighters, removing them all from the war entirely, including our aforementioned Hisagi. But this is where Yamamoto comes in. Imagine that same disparity, but now flipped on its head. Now, the Sternritter are the ones who find themselves in the vice-captain position before this man. Such is the extraordinary gap in their power. After bearing the brunt, Yamamoto shrugs off the attacks entirely, before immolating the Sternritter with nothing more than a single swipe of his Shikai. You have to understand, it is effortless on Yamamoto's part, and it reduces the enemy to ash before our eyes. This is a foe who, again, I don't think is that impressive as far as the Sternritter go, but he still killed over 200 Gotei 13 officers plus a vice-captain, and he was about to finish off Hisagi too, and Yamamoto just wipes him out with a flick of the wrist. Then, as Yamamoto challenges Yuha Bark, or who he thinks is Yhwach anyway, 3 other Sternritter jump the head captain out of nowhere, attempting to get the drop on him. This is obviously highly reminiscent of when Harabel's Fraction the Trebestia tried to jump Yamamoto back in the Fate Karakura Town arc, except now the ante is much higher. Each of these guys, Basby, Asnod, and Nananajakoop, is individually much stronger than the 3 Trebestia combined, at least if we go by how Kirige Opi fared against them earlier. On top of this, Yamamoto now only has the one arm, seriously affecting his Reiatsu output control. So the villains are considerably stronger than the last time Yamamoto was jumped in a 3-on-1. The only thing that hasn't changed here is Yamamoto. In fact, it has changed, he's technically gotten weaker. So, surely, he doesn't stand a chance against 3 Sternritter at once, right? Well, actually, he takes them all out just as easily as he did the Trebestia before. Because you see, these 3 Sternritter are no different before his eyes to those Fraction, and with a single swing of his sword, Yamamoto unleashes what can only be described as a torrent of all-consuming flame, which in the anime is depicted as rising high above even the Sokyoku Hill itself. In the manga, we see Asnod completely embroiled in the fires as he, Basby, and Nanana are all taken out, again, effortlessly. Now, of course, unlike Driscoll, these 3 survive Yamamoto's attack, which is due to a combination of factors. For starters, for as enraged as Yamamoto is, his sights are firmly set on Yhwach at this point, and he doesn't have the same personal grudge with these particular Sternritter as he did with Driscoll. In fact, he actually even calls out Yhwach's callous disdain for his own men as they collapse to the ground unconscious. And then, of course, there's the fact Basby later reveals that he offset Yamamoto's flames with his own, which is pretty impressive. I mean, it wasn't enough to completely save him, as we later see he's charred and heavily injured, and again, this was just a single strike from Yamamoto's Shikai, but still, he's alive, whereas he might not have been if he hadn't acted so quickly, which is impressive in its own right. Still, the point is that once again, that disparity is evident. To Yamamoto, individual Sternritter are little more than vice captain or fraction level nuisances, to the point where he takes out all 3 in the exact same manner he did with the Trebestia, while missing an arm to boot. Admittedly, against the Trebestia, he actively says that he's going easy on them in deference to the fact that they jumped him with only 1 arm each. So I guess that's just another way of hammering home that they are that much weaker than the Sternritter, I suppose. And then against Roidloid, who had the ability to copy 70% of Yhwach's own power, Yamamoto unleashes his bankai in untold fury, and totally walks all over the Sternritter, shutting down absolutely everything he tries to do. Yamamoto dragging the fight out, by the way, before practically erasing his body from existence in the end. Of course, this simultaneously means that Yamamoto in Bankai was capable of effortlessly overpowering even Yhwach himself, with Zanka no Tachi offering both the ultimate offense and defense in the face of his opponent. Against 70% of Yhwach's power, Yamamoto cleanly nullifies everything the Sternritter tries to do by using his Bankai, which is one of the most outright and overwhelmingly disgraceful displays of immeasurable power we've ever seen. From disintegrating Yhwach's personal sword by doing nothing, to shattering his arrows with his bare hand. Even Yhwach's Zankt Zwinger, supposedly a Quincy's ultimate defensive spell, collapses as Yamamoto raises the very dead from beneath it. And in the end, as if to put a fine point on the matter, with a swing of his flaming sword, Yamamoto erases much of Roid's body in one move, ending the fight in a very definitive statement. So all of that is to say that despite the relatively little screen time Yamamoto was afforded in the Thousand Year Blood War arc, we saw enough to know that Well, virtually every single, I guess you could call them, regular Sternritter wouldn't stand a chance against this guy in a 1v1, or hell, even 3v1 scenario. The fact Yamamoto wipes 3 of them out with a wave of his hand is absolutely absurd, when the anime shows us that both Kenpachi and Royal Palace Byakuya had to at least fight a little bit in their respective 3v1 showdowns, although again, not really. But no, Yamamoto barely gives them a second thought, and Kyoraku even laments to Robert that Yamamoto's whole thing is that he completely defies convention. How then would Yamamoto fare against the individual Sternritter using this as a basis? Well, again, I think it's pretty fair to say that all of the, shall we say, lower level to moderate level Sternritter wouldn't really stand a chance in hell against the Captain Commander, even if many of them teamed up. The real question is, at what point would a team-up of Sternritter become too much, if ever? Of course, Ichigo famously takes on 8 Sternritter at once, but he doesn't really, because for some reason they mostly attack him one at a time in a kind of staggered effect. And honestly, looking at that specific scenario to begin with, I feel like Yamamoto would also be fine. You know, Ichigo's facing off with Basby, Robert, Pepe, Nanana, Candice, Lil Toto, Meninas, and Giselle. And yeah, I mean, looking at that lineup, I don't think Yamamoto would really struggle at all here, to be totally honest. Hell, 2 of these Sternritter are part of that same trio that Yamamoto fried earlier in the arc, and Basby being one of them is quite telling, as he's definitely one of the strongest Sternritter in the series, barring the Schutzstaffel, of course, and we'll get to them later. But are there even any among this particular group who would cause Yamamoto specific difficulty? Nanana was able to paralyze Aizen for 5 minutes, which actually might be enough, if he pulls it off, for the gang to kill Yamamoto, if he literally can't move. But to do that, Nanana has to not only observe the head captain for ages, he then has to actually land a hit with his shrift, by which point Yamamoto has cooked him twice over. And then there's the ever-present question, that bothersome question, of Reiatsu negation, which itself has a bit of a turbulent history in the series. Could Yamamoto simply negate the underbelly? After all, it feels like Aizen was only affected by this power because he didn't see it coming, and also because he was bound by the Muken uniform, which Nanana himself speculates is why the underbelly was able to be so effective. Could Yamamoto prevent the effects of Giselle's blood from working on him, or Pepe's the love, for example? Considering Aizen could supposedly stop Soifon's Nigeki Kesatsu from activating, it's reasonable to assume there's probably a similar gap between Yamamoto and these Sternritter. Maybe they are slightly higher than Soifon on average. My answer is maybe. But it's not clear-cut, as Reiatsu negation is a very unreliable and seemingly totally situational circumstance. But I mean, moving on, the implication in the manga always seemed to me that the love would have worked on Byakuya had he not been wearing his Oken outfit, but truthfully we'll never know for sure. But considering it did work on characters like Meninas, and I doubt her Reiatsu is that much lower than Royal Palace Byakuya's, maybe it is, but it's also very telling as well that Yamamoto himself explained that not a single Sternritter had the power to take Yamamoto's Zanka no Tachi but him, which again says a lot. If you consider the average Sternritter had to have a similar power level to their respective captains in order to use bankai, again that works with the idea of them all being captain level as a minimum. But they didn't come close to Yamamoto apparently. And even then, the head captain made short work of a Sternritter wielding almost 3/4 of Yhwach's own strength. Now, I know that's not an ironclad equation or anything like that, but also it's fairly obvious that pre-almighty Yhwach doesn't stand a chance against Yamamoto in a 1v1 setting. Look, I've said it before, and I will stand by it. This is a point I continue to hammer home. Of course, it's only my opinion, but I think it's clear again that Yamamoto is designed and written in such a way as to be essentially unbeatable, unless you exploit some tricks, or you are transcendent. I firmly believe that Yamamoto, using everything in his arsenal, his bankai, whatnot, is the most powerful Shinigami character even in the series, before you then get to the transcendent characters, your Ichigos, your Aizens, your Soul King Yuhabucks, your Ichibes, but apart from them, I don't think any non-transcendent character defeats Yamamoto in a straight fight. Maybe someone like Kisuke could do it with enough time to plan, but that is another can of worms entirely. But anyway, taking us back to the Sternritter, and yeah, I really don't see any of these more moderate level Sternritter standing a chance against Yamamoto. I know it sounds ridiculous, but like, just imagine it on the page. Consider Masked Emasculine, for example. He obviously destroys 2 captains and then is killed by a royal realm-empowered Renji. The sheer difference between Yamamoto and Rose and Kensei is unparalleled. Yamamoto would obliterate Masked Emasculine almost as easily as he did the Sternritter in the first invasion. I guarantee you that if, say, Mask had taken Asnod's place when they jumped Yamamoto, the outcome would have been the same. Now, Mask is admittedly a little weird, especially when you take James into account, and honestly, it's that inherent weirdness that gives the Sternritter a modicum of a chance of success here. A lot of them are very strange in regards to their abilities and the blanket nature of their powers, but again, Yamamoto is designed to be unstoppable unless you target something specific. If he's given free rein to use Ryujin Jaka, it is an all-encompassing and utterly devastating Zanpakuto. Again, at the flick of a wrist, the mere activation of his Shikai is enough to reduce a Sternritter to ash. What do you think it's going to look like if he's given the chance to use any of its abilities? Nadagiri, or even Enetsu Jigoku, for example. Also, I'm aware that we've just kind of skipped over many of the lower rung of Sternritter, such as the ones who are killed in the first invasion, but I mean, Yamamoto would make just as short work of the likes of Jerome and Berenice as Kenpachi did. Maybe Lloyd could give him a slight run for his money as Lloyd captures 100% of his target's power, unlike Royd 70, but then I think Yamamoto would just do as Kenpachi did and overwhelm him. But then we have the question of someone like Kirige, who on paper shouldn't be a match for Yamamoto, but he does have a very busted ability, and one that it doesn't feel like we really know the limits of. Basically, could Kirige capture Yamamoto in the jail? And the truth is that while it seems unlikely at first glance, in reality we've actually seen nothing to suggest that he couldn't. Ichigo wasn't going to be able to break out. All that saved him was his Quincy Reiatsu, his latent Quincy Reiatsu coming to the forefront. And of course, again, if something like Nanana's The Underbelly, if it does manage to connect, it is kind of all over. You know, Asnod's The Fear was very effective against Byakuya. Would it work on Yamamoto? It's crucial to remember that Byakuya resisted the fear for much longer than the average soldier. Those are Asnod's own words. So it stands to reason Yamamoto would resist it for even longer than Byakuya did, and maybe actually kill Asnod before it could even kick in. Again, the Sternritter who stole bankai, many of who were prevalent in the first invasion, the likes of Kangdu, BG9 and Bambietta, they don't feel like they really stand any chance to me, even if they were to jump Yamamoto at once, although Kangdu is kind of interesting because Royd notes that his Blute vein is keeping him from melting, simply due to being near Yamamoto's bankai, right? So if Kangdu were to combine not only Blute vein, but his The Iron, the same power that casually blocked Hashwell's sword, maybe he'd actually last a little bit longer than the other two, though honestly I doubt it. Meanwhile, I can see Yamamoto punching BG9 with either Ikotsu or Sokotsu, and just absolutely caving the robot's chest in with a single hit, to be totally honest. Even someone like Gremmy, who can literally turn imagination into reality, is going to struggle against Yamamoto for all the same reasons he struggled against Kenpachi. A lack of experience in the face of a master combatant, and he'd likely be terrified of the head captain much in the same way he grew to see Kenpachi as a monster too. The only difference, to be honest, is that Yamamoto wouldn't toy with him, nor give him the chances that Kenpachi did to enjoy the fight. he'd likely just kill him immediately before the kid could react. Taking a step back, am I overrating Yamamoto's chances here? Maybe. And again, I pose the question, just how many Sternritter is too many? At what point does the head captain find himself overwhelmed? Or does Ryujin Jaka help him keep the enemy at bay at all times? Something like Jokaku Enjo might be enough to lock a few Sternritter down, for example, flooding the field with fire. And even then, he has his bankai to fall back on. And I don't see Zankano Tachi West allowing pretty much anything through. See, that's another point we need to consider. If Yamamoto manages to get West activated, can these weird projectile-based powers still reach him? The likes of Kirige's arrow, or Nanana's Yu, or Pepe's heart? Or are they just evaporated on contact? It's a similar question to, can Yamamoto's fire shield stop the likes of Ichimonji's ink? But to be honest, considering the Sternritter I just mentioned all fire what seem to be completely physical, tangible attacks, then I don't see why they wouldn't be stopped by West entirely. But anyway, Yamamoto has had too easy of a time for a while now, so why don't we take a look at some Sternritter against who he might actually struggle? Of course, we're talking about the Schutzstaffel, and these guys are a totally different ballgame compared to the rest. Each of the Schutzstaffel took either multiple opponents to bring down, or some kind of broken, situational, Deus Ex Machina, or something like that, and even then, most of them simply don't die, or didn't stay dead at least. Now, right off the bat, I still think that Yamamoto would defeat both Pernida and Askin. Pernida could prove troublesome with the compulsory, but again, if Yamamoto manages to activate Bankai and surround himself with a cloak of impenetrable flame that's as hot as the sun, then there's no way for Pernida to reach him at all, and to be honest, he kind of shuts the Sternritter down completely. All of Pernida's strange and deadly abilities are totally physical. They're connected to its physical body. It is revealed in the left arm's battle with Mayuri that the compulsory actually utilizes its physical nerves that come out of its fingers, and I think they are getting burned to a crisp if they come into contact with West. Of course, if Yamamoto doesn't have West active, then maybe it's a different story. I think if he gets ensnared by the nerves, like say Kenpachi does, he will take the necessary action to save himself and keep as much of himself intact as possible and as quickly as possible. Like when Kenpachi rips his own arm off, albeit Yamamoto might manage a neater solution, maybe he'll just cut his arm off instead. The key difference between Yamamoto and Kenpachi in this specific scenario is that Yamamoto, I hate to say it, is actually intelligent. Alright, I'm joking, that was a joke. Kenpachi has shown plenty of intelligence in fighting situations before, but I never did love how Kubo did Kenpachi so dirty in this scene by having him run inexplicably straight back into the fight against Pernida, not even stopping to consider what really just happened to his arm, and then getting immediately owned and nearly killed as a result. It felt like the development of Kenpachi that he had as a result of his fight with Unohana, the development we then saw blossom in his fight with Gremmy, was completely rolled back just to facilitate a very quick defeat and then remove him from the battle. And so, no, I don't think Yamamoto would just rush back in without considering Pernida's power first, especially if he just lost a limb to it. And so after that, it kind of feels like Pernida, who is very strong and broken in their own way, would simply struggle to get in close to the head captain at all. No disrespect to Mayuri, but if Mayuri is able to physically outmaneuver the left arm, at least to some degree, then Yamamoto is going to do it no problem. Though I do wonder what aspect of Yamamoto Pernida would acquire if it did manage to touch him with its nerves, and therefore evolve as a result. Because we see that it essentially mimics aspects of those it has come into contact with, whether it gains the reflexes and speed of someone like Kenpachi, or it mimics something more literal, like when it gains the actual ability of Mayuri's Matai Fukuin Shotai. So, Maybe it would simply move a lot faster or be a lot physically stronger, but ultimately I'm not sure it stands a chance. We've seen that Yamamoto is capable of reducing a Sternritter bones and all to literal ash with a swing of his Shikai. I don't think even Pernida is coming back from being atomized. Askin is a little more interesting, maybe, but again I think Yamamoto would win. I mean, Askin's the death dealing is totally broken too, in its own way, but he has the distinct disadvantage of just being a regular guy in comparison to the rest of the Schutzstaffel. Obviously, if Yamamoto fails to kill him with Ryujin Jaka, then presumably Askin will gain immunity to the head captain's Reiatsu, but if he really wanted to, I think Yamamoto would just kill my boy in one shot. It's a little like how Kubo noted that Gin could kill Askin with Kamishini no Yari's poison were he given the opportunity, if Askin hadn't ingested any of it beforehand and didn't know it was coming, say. It's the same here, but honestly it's probably even easier for Yamamoto to pull off. Again, if he uses Bankai and turns Askin to ash, there is nothing he's doing about that, he is going to die. Perhaps an interesting turn of events would be if Askin ingests a lot of Yamamoto's fire, could he then poison Yamamoto with fire? Would that actually work? I don't know, it just feels like Askin is fighting a massive uphill battle against someone like Yamamoto. Again, this isn't going to go down like it did with Grimjo, who just walks headfirst into a gift ball and asks questions later. Yamamoto is much more likely to see through Askin's tricks. This is a guy who is analysing Wonderweiss in real time, and still reacting in time as well. That being said, Askin managed to land a direct hit with a gift ball on Yoruichi of all characters, something to this day I'm a little annoyed that we didn't see, as I think it would lend a lot of helpful context to how Askin was able to manage such a thing, because it seems a little unbelievable, to be honest. Then, of course, there's the question that always dogs any discussion regarding Askin. How do physical attacks work against this guy? Because, of course, we see Yushiro beating Askin up initially, but as soon as Askin gains immunity to his Shunko, Yushiro's punches just don't have any effect. And is that because he was using Shunko at the time and so that is being negated? Or does having immunity to Yushiro's power literally stop his physical punch in its tracks, ability or not? I feel like the latter just can't be true. Look, if it's the case that Askin's power nullifies a Reiatsu-based attack, but he still feels the effects of a physical attack, then I think we'd see a similar situation to what happened with Wonderweiss. Askin finds a way to negate Ryujin Jaka, but Yamamoto then just dismantles him with Hakuda. Don't get me wrong, Askin is very powerful, and his entire character revolves around the idea of him being underestimated and presenting himself in such a way, but Yamamoto is not your average opponent. He isn't even Yoruichi. He's above that. And I just think that for all of his broken power, Askin is still just a dude out of his depth in this scenario who is liable to be killed, and I think Yamamoto would manage it, but I mean, maybe I'm wrong. But then we have Hashwolf, and this is where things start to get weird. This is where we reach a point where I am no longer sure if Yamamoto can win or not. The problem with Hashwolf is, of course, the balance. Frankly, although again he's very strong and very skilled with the blade, frankly, without the balance, he doesn't stand a chance against the Captain Commander. But he does have the balance, and so that needs to be taken into account. And I kind of wonder what the logistics are of this ability in this scenario. Would the balance detect that Yamamoto is a huge threat to Hashwolf, and thus tip the scale in his favour? Or would the balance perhaps not consider Yamamoto a huge threat, at which point maybe he can't win anyway? The thing is, the anime kind of transformed the way we look at Hashwolf, in my opinion anyway. The manga presented him as a nigh untouchable statuesque figure who dominated every fight he was involved in before he was killed via some, deus ex machina, essentially. But in the anime, Hashwolf is very quickly overwhelmed and killed by Tenjiro, in what was a genuine shock for manga readers. And now that's interesting to me. The balance activates again in another anime exclusive scene because Squad Zero experiences good fortune by not having to fight Yuhabak after he leaves the Cage of Life. The balance in this instance accrues such immense power from that shift that it's capable of breaking said cage in two, which shouldn't be possible. And yet apparently the balance doesn't activate when Hashwolf faces Tenjiro. The thing is, the balance is a tricky power because it only seems to activate when someone experiences good fortune within Hashwolf's radius. Therefore, perhaps it didn't consider Tenjiro simply facing Hashwolf in a one-on-one situation to be good fortune for Tenjiro, and by the time he killed Hashwolf it was too late. So maybe Yamamoto simply being strong enough to defeat Hashwolf and then subsequently facing him isn't considered good fortune, which is a little weird to me because it's certainly not great for Hashwolf. And if so, if the balance doesn't activate, as we see against Tenjiro, then yeah, Yamamoto is going to win. The main question here is what constitutes good fortune, right? I mean, if Yamamoto is given the chance to activate his bankai, does that count as him experiencing good fortune? I don't really know. Look, I'll be honest, I still think Yamamoto wins this fight if for no other reason than his bankai is so all-consuming, and good fortune or not, I don't really see how Hashwolf, with his fairly limited skill set, overcomes a shield with the power of the sun that has the ability to erase things from existence. The same goes for the charred blade that eradicates enormous pieces of the earth with a single touch. What on earth does someone like Hashwolf do about that? And again, unlike the majority of the Schutzstaffel, as far as we know, this could be wrong, this could be proven wrong in Core 4, but Hashwolf is more akin to Askin in that they are mostly regular guys who will just die if they are killed. Moving on, there's only two Sternritter left that I want to talk about, but these are probably the most contentious too, and so up next is Gerard Valkyrie. Now look, Gerard faces Bankai Kenpachi, completed Bankai Hitsugaya, and Royal Palace Bankai Byakuya all at the same time. Based on what we've looked at and talked about, the baseline that we have used to date, that feels like a Yamamoto-style disparity. You know, this is one guy who takes out all of the Vizard with no trouble whatsoever, and then faces off against three of the strongest captains at their strongest points. To say Yamamoto could defeat him conclusively on his own feels absurd, and it is absurd, but there is more to it than that, because it's not really a fair comparison. Yamamoto, and by extension Kenpachi and Byakuya, dealt with their 3-on-1 scenarios with ease and very little effort. Gerard, meanwhile, sure he takes on all three of them at once, and sure he technically continues to get one up on them, but he also dies on 4 separate occasions. The only reason Gerard is even remotely capable of putting up a fight against this trio to begin with is because, you guessed it, the miracle is totally broken. In terms of raw power and skill, again, Gerard is, I would argue, almost unmatched among the Sternritter, but he's not so good that he can deal with these captains with ease. In fact, they prove more than a match for him on multiple occasions, and when working together, are able to kill him over and over again. Byakuya kills Gerard by eviscerating him with his bankai, then Bankai Kenpachi cuts the giant in two. After that, the three of them come together to destroy Gerard's entire body, before the Sternritter is at last killed for good, not by them, but by Yuhabak. So, there are a few questions to ask here. How far would Yamamoto get on his own, and does he have the raw power necessary to destroy Gerard's core? Kubo seemed to imply on Club Outside that Bankai Kenpachi doesn't have enough strength to do the job, but Yamamoto's Bankai seems to remove things from existence entirely. Again, Gerard's power is a little like Hashwalth's, in that the miracle allows him to achieve the impossible, essentially, and that the greater the odds stacked against him, the more powerful he becomes. So it's circumstantial. And so therefore, again, it comes down to, like the balance, what does the miracle think of Yamamoto? Gerard grows absolutely gigantic in Varvelt because he faces off against so many members of the Gotei 13 at once, and because they collectively deal a lot of damage to him. Because the odds are so stacked against him. Basically, because there was no chance for him to win that fight at all, he grew exponentially stronger. How would the miracle view a 1v1 against Yamamoto? I have no doubt, to be honest, that Yamamoto could deal with Gerard in his base form, maybe with little problem, but beyond that, as the fight begins to escalate and spiral out of control, the reality is much harder to determine. But as we start to wrap things up here, there is one Sternritter against whom I don't think even Yamamoto could defeat. And of course, that's Sternritter X, the X-Axis Lige Barrow, whose shrift is so utterly busted that I struggle to imagine almost any character actually killing him without the help of very specific circumstantial aids. The thing with the X-Axis is it seems like, even in base, Lige can't be killed, because he gets 3 freebies essentially. If his life is threatened, he can open his second eye and his phasing ability activates. The true nature of the X-Axis activates briefly. But there's no downtime, because once he's opened his eye 3 times, there's no penalty for doing so. Instead, it's the opposite. He automatically activates his Volsten dish and gains full intangibility. So, Kyoraku was capable of totally overwhelming Lige and forcing him to transform, so I think Yamamoto would easily make that happen too. After this though, I don't think Yamamoto's in a good spot here. The only reason Kyoraku lands a hit on Zilliel at all, and even then he technically doesn't land the hit himself, is because of a loophole created by his bankai. Yamamoto's bankai, although maybe the most damaging and powerful we've ever seen, it is a lot more straightforward than Kyoraku's, and in my opinion, doesn't have the same capacity for loopholes. It's about raw power, raw damage, and overwhelming his opponent with the ultimate attack and defense. But if Yamamoto's flames literally can't touch Lige, then what can he do? He's out of options. This is only compounded by the fact that I do actually think the X-Axis could get through Zanka no Tachi West. It's one of the few abilities that I think actually can, because it isn't firing a physical projectile. Like those other Sternritter we discussed earlier, instead it simply destroys everything on that axis between the barrel of the gun and the target, and basically plucks it from existence. Lige himself says that you can't block his attack, because there's nothing to block. So Yamamoto's fire cloak would essentially just have a hole punched straight through it and then through Yamamoto himself. This is all without even considering the fact that Lige seems to be totally immortal, where Gerard is also immortal, but with the possibility of death were his core to be destroyed. Lige doesn't seem to even have that weakness. Like, as far as we know, he literally can't be killed unless he is somehow stripped of his godly powers first. And again, that only happens in the manga thanks to the Shinken Hakyoken. There's no evidence that Yamamoto, for all his impossible strength, skill, and experience, has any means of doing that, when Lige is totally intangible all the time. The only chance Yamamoto really has is if, say, Zanka no Tachi East works like the X-Axis and just removes matter from existence, but even then, it still wouldn't work. Because the flames are collected on the edge of Yamamoto's blade, it's still a tangible thing. He still needs to make actual physical contact. So again, I don't see how he could do it. Could Zanka no Tachi West maybe burn Lige if he gets too close? Perhaps, but Honestly, I don't think so. I don't believe it works like that, though I could be wrong, but we saw that Zangorin, a Kido blade, wasn't able to touch Lige either, so I don't know why Flames would. So yeah, all things considered, Lige feels to me like the only Sternritter who Yamamoto absolutely could not defeat in a 1v1. I just don't see a viable path forward. For Gerard and Hashwolf, the results feel much more up in the air. It's very much dependent on how their strange powers of the miracle and the balance respectively work. But as for everyone else, I don't really see much of an issue, to be honest. It kind of feels to me like the head captain would defeat them all. Alright everyone, but that's it for today's video. Thank you so very much for watching. I do hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you took something of value away from it as well. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. How many of the Sternritter can Yamamoto defeat in a 1v1 scenario, or even a 3v1 scenario if we go on the lower to moderate rated Sternritter? I'd love to get all of your thoughts down in the comments below. Maybe I have overrated Yamamoto here. That is totally possible. Maybe you think he would lose to someone like Pernida, to someone like Askin. Maybe he would definitely lose to the likes of Hashwolf or Gerard. I'd love to get all of your thoughts down in the comments below, so do please let me know if you think I'm right about this, or if you think I'm off base. Either way, I'd love to read your comments, so do please leave them down below. Once again, everyone, thank you so very much for watching. Consider hitting subscribe if you enjoyed this video today, if you want to see more just like this, and if you want to support the channel as well. It all does go a very long way. Speaking of which, consider supporting me over on Patreon as well to get your name in the credits of every single video like this. These are all people who are taking that support for me another step further, and it is making a massive, massive difference right now on YouTube. And frankly, it's helping to keep the lights on, so it is greatly, greatly appreciated. Alright everyone, but this has been a pretty long one now, so again, thank you so very much for sticking with it and watching all the way to the end if you did. Until next time, we'll catch you later, and I'll see you then.